too. And we're live streaming.
Thanks, Jennifer. The August 4th, 2022 License Committee is now called to order. Why don't we just take a moment of silence? Amen.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
Good. You're chair of this committee too?
Yeah, you did it.
Oh my God, you chair everything.
Well, I guess we meet so rarely, Mayor. It's kind of okay. We're on item 2, approval of the October 19th, 2021 minutes. Do I hear a motion?
Move for approval.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Is there any old business to come before the committee? If not, we'll move on to new business, and we'll have our legal or our budget staff to discuss the amendments to the ordinance.
Chairman, actually, this is Meg Thompson, Director of Business and Neighborhood Services. I'm going to be leading the presentation today.
That's even better. Thanks.
Well, and I say that, but I do want to be very clear while I'm setting up my screen here that this was a cross-departmental collaborative effort. So I'm going to MC and lead because we were kind of the project coordinators, but I'm going to be calling on our legal staff, Deputy Chief Thompson and Deputy Fire Marshal Chief Jalazada to help me as needed to get through this presentation. So with that, yes, Mayor.
If I could interrupt, I did mean when the chairman asked about old business, and I don't see the right staff on the call to address this question, but I'd like to just register it for us to get a report. And I haven't heard of anything, so I assume everything's going well, but you know, we kind of switched over to a new calendar with the business license and following the state guidelines now. I just wanted to ask the question and have it report to committee, can be the next meeting, as to how all that's going and how it went. So just wanted to register that as old business. Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
That's okay.
no worries.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mayor, we'll just put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
That'd be great. Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Meg?
All right. Here we go. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be some proposed amendments and updates to our late night establishment regulations. Just as a refresher, because it's been a while, this ordinance was actually originally passed back in 2013, so it was probably due for a review anyway. But then, as you know, 2020 happened and all that came with that. And we did do some changes as a result of that regarding mobile food vending late night in the Central Business District. But at that same time, we were also looking at our brick and mortar late night establishments. And Dustin, Deputy Chief Thompson, would you like to talk a little bit about what was going on, why we were looking at this update?
Thank you, Meg. Real briefly, I would just say that this new proposed ordinance is fair, and our sampling of the business owners, late night ordinance business owners, has been overall positive. We've received some really good feedback, and we've made some changes on that. But all this is for public safety. We went line by line, multiple days, multiple calls, making sure that one, we were going to produce a really good public safety product, but also to be fair to our business owners and to provide a safe environment for our tourism and our citizens. So.
And can you just so fairly quickly, I know one of the major changes is the 12 a.m. After drinking. Can you sort of tell us how we got there?
Are you talking about the 12 a.m. for the mobile food vending?
No,
Councilmember No?
no. I mean, is this ordinance that we're looking at right now will change some of the permitting process, and there will be restrictions in terms of when you cut off selling alcohol?
We're not changing any of that.
Okay,
That there's no change in hours of operation.
okay.
But what I am going to do, I will go through what the major big changes are and kind of walk you guys through that. But I do want to be clear, because we did get that from the community as a concern. We are not proposing to change hours of operations at this time for brick and mortar establishments.
Councilman Gregory, I think to answer your question, any business, and you'll see it's any business that's providing alcohol after 12 a.m. just has some additional steps to take for
That's
security.
right.
those
Yes.
types of things.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. Thank you.
All right, and as the Deputy Chief Thompson mentioned, we did do a lot of public engagement. So last year, when we initially made a presentation to City Council last fall, we heard pretty clearly that we had missed the mark from the public. We had a series of meetings after that with operators and just people in the industry, and had a really good turnout. So we're very passionate. Between those two open houses, we had about 70 people show to voice their concerns. Basically, after hearing that, the mayor gave us the direction to table it for the rest of the year, and to come back this year with a new proposal. So that's what we've been working on since the beginning of this year. And we've done kind of, as we got to a place that we felt good about as staff, we started doing outreach to the industry. So that included working with like a small focus group of operators earlier this spring. We then made a presentation to the restaurant advisory group. And then we did another big public meeting, open house sort of thing, at the end of June. That one had about 30 folks at that one.
So could I ask a question? And I think I know the answer, but I'm just double checking.
Yes.
I'm sure you had the addresses of the approximately 70 that were there last October. Were they all invited to the 2022 meetings?
Yes, they were. And the police department was also gracious enough to help us out by actually hand flyering to operators that they knew were late night operators. So we tried to be as inclusive as possible to get folks to the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Mayor, we also included on our weekly Central Business District email distribution list the flyer. So multiple ways to get the information out there.
Yeah, it was in our Hey Charleston newsletter as well. And I do want to thank Councilmember Bowden for coming to the meeting to hear about what we were working on. Okay, so with that, what changes are we proposing? Oh, sorry, just this is an example of the materials that we shared at that outreach meeting. So, and we can send this out to y'all as well if it would be helpful. But on one column, we have the existing ordinance, and then on the other, we have the proposed changes so that the folks from the industry were able to see, because again, this is an older ordinance, they were able to see side by side what we were proposing. So what are we proposing? One of the things here is that we have simplified actually the definition of what a late night establishment is. If you look at the old one, it talks about like business license classification and zoning designation and all of this stuff. We've really simplified that to any place that sells on-premise consumption of alcohol after midnight. What has really changed in doing that simplification is that this now will include those establishments that are located within an accommodations use. So essentially a hotel bar now has to comply with this ordinance as well. For the noise and waste management sections, again, we tried to simplify. So instead of having specific different things, we just essentially said that you have to comply with existing city codes that already address this. This will make it easier to enforce and understand for the operators.
Hey, Meg, a quick question on the other screen.
Mhm.
Of the participants, how many were hotels and bars?
That came to the meetings.
Yes.
I don't know off the top of my head, but not many, I don't think.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Chief Thompson, do you want to talk about why we made that change really quickly?
In a future slide, you'll see where it's, most of the bars, their occupancy, not bars, excuse me, hotel bars, their occupancy, and then just off the top of my head, I don't do that. It's, in another division, but say 50 people. We're not laying a big burden on hotel bars or any other bar restaurant with a late night ordinance. Our wording, again, I don't want to jump ahead, but our wording, our requirements for security staff are based on your occupancy at any time. So even if you have a 400 occupancy load, if it's a whatever night of the week and you only have 50 people in your business, this is what we're requiring. So for a hotel bar that maybe has an occupancy load of 50 people, we're saying you have to have one designated security staff. And that could be your bar manager, whoever you're designating as your security person. And basically everyone needs to operate a safe establishment. And if we deem that it's not a safe establishment, then we'll step in and start making changes. And that's where the tickets come in later.
Quick question for you. So, I did see the chart in terms of number of security based upon capacity. So if I have a capacity of 400, regardless of whether or not there are only 50 people in there, I still have to go by the chart in terms of the number of security personnel.
The chart talks about how many people are actually in the place at that moment.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, and we'll show that to everyone as well.
And that's just to help them out, Councilman Gregory, on a slow night. We heard back from the business owners, hey, I got a slow night. I don't need to have 5 security employees in the business. If it's a slow night, but we told them, and obviously when we speak about it going further, if 400 people show up, you're going to have to call people in. You're going to have to make adjustments. So again, we're leaving it on the businesses to make their own decisions, run a safe establishment, and then the city will step in if and when there's problems. But we don't ever want it to get to that point. We're going to do everything we can to work with everybody. Hopefully not reaching that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so this was actually my next slide. Sorry, I forgot what order these were in. So like we were saying, we have this is the section that we talked the most about, to be honest. This was a lot of back and forth with the industry, like what makes sense for them, but also accomplishes what we need it to from a public safety perspective. So like Dustin was saying, this allows for flexibility of different business types. So the LNE is able to select a person that they designate as their security staff. And we're kind of leaving it up to them who that person is, but we then look at their occupancy to how many of those people do they need to designate. And then we have expectations of what those security personnel are supposed to be doing. So they must be identifiable. They must have a presence at the entrance. They must check IDs, crowd management, that sort of thing. Anything else on that, Chief? No? Okay. And then Chief Jalazda, if you want to talk about how we thought through setting up this chart based on occupancy.
Sure thing, Meg. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So originally we had come up with a plan that was using a percentage approach, and we thought we had it solved. And in another one of the group meetings, we realized that the percentage approach was still somewhat penalizing the larger occupancies. So we came back and retooled this again and decided that we'd go back to a fixed chart, but it was very specific to how many people are actually occupying the facility at that time. And I think this really gives them a good solution but it's very important to understand something that Chief Thompson said earlier. We're really putting the control back in the hands of the business. So we've made it very clear that we've given them this chart as a minimum expectation. And if something changes, they need to adapt to it. So we're really trying to put the control and management back in their hands and focus on giving them a baseline.
Okay. We've also yes, Mayor.
When you were talking about checking ID, are we requiring that they have those fancy checkers? I mean, it's one thing just to look at somebody's ID. Oh yeah, your birthday looks right, versus the kind that actually can tell whether it's a fake ID or not.
So we did add a specific subsection that addresses underage drinking under the security heading, that they must have a plan in place to identify people under 21. Okay. Especially after 10 p.m. We are not requiring them to have those ID scanners off the bat, but it is one of those, like, in a remediation plan if we start having problems. Dustin, you want to talk about that?
I think you covered it. It's just we made it known that the police department has some, and obviously if you're starting to have a problem, we can come over and help you out with that. They are expensive. There's a lot of different programs that these businesses can buy. Like Meg said, we're leaving it on them. You need to have the plan in place. If your plan's not working, we're going to work with you, encourage you to get these scanners or some other method to improve. If that doesn't happen, then maybe it's to start issuing of a citation. Again, we don't want to get to that point, but right. Early on, we heard back that they were expensive and that we don't want to punish somebody that's got a good plan in place.
Right, so, and technology can change over time as well. That's right. All right, just checking. Thank you.
Sure. We also phrased it this way. A lot of establishments stress that they kind of function just as restaurants earlier in the evening and have families come in and eat dinner before they kind of transition to more of a late night atmosphere. So this allows for them to kind of make that transition in a plan that makes sense for how they do their operations. Okay, so on the permit.
Wait a minute, Meg, before leaving that point. It seems like it was a kind of soft answer to me on whether they get the scanners that the mayor was talking about or not. I mean, are we requiring them to get that or not?
I can elaborate, Councilman Waring. We are not requiring them to get an ID scanner. However, if and when it gets to the point, and it's on one of the last slides, you're issued your first LNE citation. That triggers a meeting with our the police department, fire department, and our legal staff to go over your security plan and everything that you submitted to get your LNE permit. At that time, we can lay out requirements for you to purchase ID scanners or to hire additional staff or to actually get SLED certified security personnel, that type of thing. But it will be triggered whenever that first LNE ticket is issued. Again, I don't want to ever get to that point because we want to work with all businesses, make sure they're doing it safely. I think most businesses, once they see that it is working at other establishments, will go ahead and purchase these. But off the bat, under this ordinance, we're not asking them to purchase them until there's a violation, and then there'll be a corrective action laid out by our legal staff to that business.
Okay. I mean, I think we all know underage drinking is going on down there.
Sure.
It's part of the problem. I look at that as the cost of doing business on behalf of the business person. So basically, they're not going to be required to do it until they get caught.
Well, if they're knowingly, and it's all embedded in the ordinance, if they're knowingly admitting underage drinking, I won't bore you to death with all the ways that they're doing it, but there's a lot of different ways that these individuals are getting into certain establishments. And when we know it's occurring, when we document that it's occurring, and we start writing the tickets, then the corrective action will be, the steps for correction action will be taken then.
Okay,
I agree with you. That was what I put in the first go round, but the feedback that we got from most business owners were, you know, we're doing it the right way. A majority of them are. And until there is a violation or where there's a known violation, we'll continue to let them operate themselves.
This is Councilman Mitchell. I understand.
No, we're Councilman Mitchell.
I understand fully what you're saying, but I always believe that we should be proactive in doing things and doing it from the beginning and not wait until the end and put it in place. Because once we do it afterwards, then we get we run into more problems. They want to fight. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. I believe we should just do it in the beginning and get it over with and tell them that they need to have these things. Because I go down in King Street and I go down there and I'm disgusted with it in the first place because I live on King Street too. And I go down there, I'm disgusted with it, period. And I see the young people down there and I know they're not no 21. I can tell you that right after that, they're not 21. Because my daughters and all, my grands and all that go down there, but they're 23 years old and older. And they know a lot of them is not 21, but they're going in those places. And they're doing a lot of different things down there, but I believe we should have this in place when we doing these ordinances. Let's get it over with and have it squared away. That's my take on it, and not wait till something happens, then we have to go behind it and do it again. That's just my take on it, you know.
Councilman Bowden.
Thank you. So the really instructive thing about going to the meeting that Meg held with some of the business owners was sort of the repeated message to the folks in that room that they're not the problem, and everybody knows that. And so the people who showed up and had great input into this and had a lot of questions about it, they're really not the ones we're concerned about. What I think that this does is give the tools to the police, to the city, to sort of focus on the problem children, and essentially we know who those are already to some extent, without punishing some the very responsible business owners who already have a ton of liability if they're serving people under 21. So I think the safeguards that are already in place are enough to convince the vast majority of these businesses to do the right thing. But I do think that this gives us the tools to deal with the ones that aren't. And from what I was hearing, that's going to be happening, pretty swiftly.
Councilman Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on what Councilman Bowden just said, the hesitancy you had, Councilman Bowden, with pretty much knowing who the bad actors are, and I'm understanding they're very few, I think maybe a couple. If we know who they are, and I agree with you about Officer Thompson about most of them are, good actors. It seems like we've known the bad actors for a while. What are we doing to, frankly, if they don't straighten up, bring closure to the bad actors on King Street?
Councilman Waring, I'd say in my opinion, if and when this late night ordinance is passed and approved and passed, it will give us the backing to do what we need to do to shut businesses down. If there's a whole list of things that a business can do to violate this ordinance, and when they do that, it'll trigger the first citation, and that second citation, there's a whole lot of not good things that would happen to a business to lose their late night ordinance.
And how many such citations have we given without the ordinance? But if we know the bad actors, as Councilman Bowden said, and we do, how many of them have gotten any citations, and what have we done about it? I think that's what Councilman Waring was getting at.
I would say that So there's been a variety. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I apologize. I'll obviously provide those to you. I would say in the past, we've been limited to some disorderly conduct tickets in front of the businesses, or maybe a business is operating, obviously the loud music, those type of things. We've been able to issue those tickets. But I would say that for a business that's knowingly providing underage drinking, knowingly doing a couple other things that's listed out in this new proposed ordinance, the old ordinance didn't really give us the opportunity to start addressing those under that ordinance. And I think we had a good template there, but the way we've changed things in this one, it'll be an immediate addressing the problem immediately. And then one of the big things, and I know Meg will get to it, is we're not waiting for adjudication. We are, the issuance of the ticket is what starts the corrective action and or the removal of the late night ordinance if it's the LNE if it's that second citation. Mike, you want to help me out with that one, or did I explain it?
And Mr. Chairman, someone has their hand up from the fire department.
I think that's Chief DeLazada. Chief, are you there?
Chief?
He said he was having technical difficulties a moment ago.
Okay.
And I'm happy to
Yeah.
add a point. Right now, some of these businesses have been receiving summons to go to livability court. They do receive fines. Right now, they treat those, some of them just treat the fines as a course of business, and there's not really any teeth or any consequences for racking up tickets. So as we'll go over later, I think that the late night, the late night entertainment permit does give teeth. So a ticket is no longer the cost of business, but it could cost you your business.
That's a major difference.
That's a big, excellent point. Yeah, I had one place with a lot of complaints about noise, and they just paid the ticket. You know, what's $1,000? You know, they just paid the ticket. But if you put this in place, and DC Thompson can effectually over the procedure shut them down at midnight where they can't serve from 12 to 2. Now that's hitting their pocketbook there. They're going to pay attention to that, aren't they?
That's what we heard from the business owners, that taking the LNE, the 12 a.m. to 2 a.m. business is what they thrive on. So it's a big hit to lose that. But I hope I answered the question. I believe that the old ordinance didn't give me everything that I needed to be able to shut the problem businesses down. This new proposed one, if and when it's passed, will give us what we need to do something immediately. There's clauses in here for, a significant incident, i.e. something damaging the business over $100,000, a shooting, something like that. We shut down immediately for the night, address it, that night. So there's a lot of different things that we can do or propose to do under this new ordinance.
Meg, can you hear me now?
Councilman Waring? Chief? Yes, we can hear you now.
I apologize. I'm actually outdoors and my device is overheating and shut down.
Oh,
So
We gotta get you better equipment.
I did want to touch on, Councilman Gray, what you mentioned. I don't want you to think we haven't been writing citations. We have a number of locations that have been through or in various stages of the court process. We have probably half a dozen that have been written specifically in LNE violations. We've got another 20 or 30 that have been written on other violations. And really what I see the crux of this being is we're strengthening the ordinance, we're cleaning up the ordinance, and we're simplifying the ordinance and making some things very clear and specific on how we're going to proceed if this behavior continues.
Councilman Waring?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listen, I'm in favor, obviously, to strengthen this ordinance, but let me ask, let's say if we go to another step. At what point in time can we pull the business license? I understand stopping operations from 10 to 12. If we got bad actors down there, in particular, going going beyond underage drinking and potentially selling illegal drugs, etc. At what point in time does the city say, hey, you can't continue to do business in this town like that, especially when we have proof? At any point in time, does this ordinance get to the point to where the city can actually yank, after a certain number of citations, you can't continue to do business in this town?
Isn't a hearing required to get to that point?
There are steps that Mallory can go through, but worst case scenario, yes, that is possible.
Yes, there is a business license revocation ordinance currently on the books, but this seems to be I believe that this is a quicker, more effective, more efficient tool to get people in compliance.
Okay. Well, we can go with the rest of the explanation, but I'm ready to vote on this.
Any other questions so far? Okay, let's complete the presentation.
Okay.
Sir, I will go through these next steps quickly. So we're also using this opportunity to do some internal process improvement with how these permits go through the system. So currently there is a staff L&E review committee of like 8 different staff members that review these applications. What we're proposing is to dissolve that committee and just have it be reviewed like a regular permit through our system, which will be more efficient with staff time and make it easier to track all of these. One other new thing that we're proposing is that these must be renewed annually. Right now, if you get an L&E permit, you're good, you just have it. Putting in a renewal not only allows us to check the record, are you being a good operator, but it also allows the fire department to do additional inspections as needed. Just a reminder, this is what a business currently has to go through to become a late night operator. As you can see, some businesses, depending on where they're located, have to go through a zoning special exception. They then have to get an L&E permit. They also have to get a business license. Right now with that committee set up, sometimes zoning staff have to look at the same business 3 times before they're approved for L&E, and that's maybe not the best use of our staff time. And it's also a bit confusing because the current application is in a web-based platform that is completely separate from our usual InterGov permitting system. So it is just this very odd thing for staff and businesses. So this is an opportunity for us to fold it in with our regular permits. We're also doing away with the current ordinance has a 14-day automatic approval if they don't hear from the committee. So again, getting rid of that committee aspect, getting rid of that 14-day automatic approval makes things a little bit easier for staff to manage. All right, and with that, we've kind of already hit on a bunch of this, but I'm going to ask Mallory to go through the violations.
All right, thank you. And yes, this is kind of what Deputy Chief Thompson has already stated. We kind of want to have, our staff is amazing at giving people, working with them and verbal warnings at first. However, if you do get the issuance of a first municipal ordinance summons, we would require them to meet with staff, do the remediation plan, and hope to help, move them towards a successful path. Upon issuance of a second municipal ordinance summons within 1 year. This isn't to say if somebody receives a summons and then 5 years later they receive a second. That's not what we're looking after. We're looking at consistent problems to address. However, if somebody does receive that second summons, what we're doing is authorizing our Director of Revenue Collections to be able to potentially suspend or revoke their late night entertainment permit. What would happen is they would receive notice, and then we'll go into the appeal process, I think is the next slide. But this would potentially prevent them from being able to operate from midnight to 2 a.m. The next part of the violations we hinted at before would be if there is an emergency situation. Oh, do you mind going back 1 second? There is a very limited situation where there would not be notice in time for a hearing. And under those situations, we did limit our ability to completely revoke or suspend somebody's license. Those would be only in situations of great bodily harm, or if there was some sort of damage or property over in excess of 100,000. Other than that, people would have the ability to operate until they've been appealed. Okay, next slide. All right, for the emergency suspension, like we talked about previously, if our fire marshal or police or code enforcement officer does detect an emergency situation, and there is an immediate need to pull that business's LNE for that day, we reserve the right to. And as I believe we stated before, it is a privilege to operate a late night establishment in the city of Charleston. So this would be our ability to pull that for the night, and then we can reassess the situation and potentially issue an emergency letter the next day. The appeals process, now this is different than our current appeals process. Should that second summons be issued, they would receive notification within 10 days. They would receive notification of the suspension or revocation. They would have 10 days to request a hearing before a hearing officer. The hearing officer is a different process than we currently have, which would essentially bring people back in front of either this committee, I think, Board of Adjustment and Appeals, or the Code of Board Appeals. So we have a very complicated system currently. The hearing officer would be an individual, not an employee of the city, but somebody appointed by the mayor and approved by this committee. I believe that this would be a much more streamlined, faster process and consistent process for determining whether or not to uphold a suspension or revocation, because this allows us to have that hearing within 45 days. Right now, also in the livability process, when businesses get summons, they will often ask for multiple continuances, jury trials, and some of these drag on for a year plus. So having this hearing officer route, taking it out of the court for determination, very much streamlines the process for approving. So.
Just a quick question for you.
Yes.
In terms of revocation and permit denial, are we distinguishing the permit from the business license?
Yes, we are focused today solely on the late night entertainment permit. So any revocation, the business would still be able to operate, but they would not have the privilege of being able to operate after midnight.
Understand. And but at what point, going back to Councilman Waring's issue, at what point, if there are constant violations, can we revoke the permit, the business license, rather? I'm sorry.
Yes, the city does have the business license ordinance. There is a process for revoking a business's business license. It is a different threshold. So I think that this is right now a quicker, more streamlined process to address a potentially problematic situation before the threshold of a full business license revocation would take place.
So that would continue under the auspices of this committee?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's correct. Mr. Chairman, if I may add to that.
Yes, Mayor.
I believe, my memory is when we looked into that if there's a number of repetitive offenses of any kind, that we can declare a public nuisance on the establishment, and that's what puts their business license in jeopardy. And so last year, a couple of these, quote, bad actors that we've been referring to, I actually wrote a letter to them, putting them on notice that they were at risk with future violations of just that happening. And in fact, I think their behavior modified in a positive way after they received that letter. But
I bet.
That's kind of the process we go through.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, Mallory, you can continue.
Well, I think I get to pass the torch now.
Yes, so just to wrap up, at the end of the ordinance, we are building in a little bit of a grace period to build that internal processing system that I was talking about, and also for businesses to get into compliance. Like I said, the renewal aspect is new, so everyone, there's no grandfathering. Everyone will have to reapply and then renew annually. So we're building in some time to get all of that done. And then also, this will not be the last time that y'all hear from me. Another thing that we've built into the ordinance at Councilmember Bowden's request is that we will come and give you guys an annual update of how things are going with late night permits, any violations, tickets that we've issued, kind of a summary report of how it's gone throughout the year. So we are asking that this committee endorse this ordinance so that it can go for first reading at City Council this month. If that were to happen, we would hope that, given that grace period I just mentioned, that the ordinance would be in effect by the end of the year, and we would expect LNEs to start getting into compliance in their first quarter of next year. That is all I have.
I think there was a motion on the floor earlier from Councilman Waring, but it wasn't second.
Yeah, I move for approval. I move for approval on that, Mr. Chairman, but I do have a question during discussion.
Sure.
Second.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Properly seconded. Any discussion?
I do have some, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Requiring this annual applying for the fee, is there a fee charged? The license? I mean, it's going to be more work for our people to process these applications. I think the businesses should pay for that.
So the way that we've written it is that we do have the option to charge a fee. So as we work with IT and Susan Poteet in process improvement to build the system, that'll help us determine what that fee would be. On average, fees for things like this are $25, $30.
Okay, but I mean, we'll have all that worked out before, by the time the grace period.
Yes, yeah, that's why we built in that
Okay.
grace period, to make sure we get all of that set up.
All right, great. Yeah, thank you.
Any further discussion? Ready for the question?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
again, I think this is an assumption on my part, but isn't it true that a LNE permit or license would not be transferable? Say if I had one and I sold my business, the next person would have to reapply to get one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion or questions? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Is there anything else to come before this committee?
Good work.
If not, good work, folks. The meeting